We're going to bring in Fox News Radio White House correspondent and attorney John Decker. So, John, yes, it is still early, and it's tough to get a handle on who stands for what with so many Democratic candidates in the race at this time. That said, though, can VP Biden maintain his leader of the pack status, and how much leverage can he get out of his morals matter message? You know, like when will he really have to start selling the platform?
Absolutely, Arthel, and good afternoon to you. I think that Joe Biden is counting on a lot of support coming from unions. In fact, what we're going to see when Joe Biden has this first campaign event in Pittsburgh this week is you're going to see a lot of union signs coming from firefighters in Pittsburgh, the SEIU in Pittsburgh, the AFSCME in Pittsburgh. All of these entities are sort of betting on Joe Biden to be the Democratic nominee in 2020. It's a long way off, as we know, but this is one of those pillars of the Democratic Party that Joe Biden will be counting on in terms of trying to win a plurality of the vote going into that whole election cycle, which begins next January.
Yeah, an early analysis says that President Trump is most concerned about running against Vice President Biden. Is that what you're hearing as well, John? And if that is the case, what is President Trump's best defense against Vice President Biden and vice versa?
Well, I think that what's going to be interesting to see, if indeed Joe Biden becomes the nominee, and again, it's way too early to predict that, is you're going to see both Joe Biden and whoever the Democratic nominee is, if it's not Joe Biden, and President Trump campaigning in some of the same states, because it's going to come down to, like it came down to in 2016, Ohio and Michigan, Wisconsin, where the president was at this campaign rally in Green Bay last night, and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of those states where early polls are showing that Joe Biden is the only Democratic candidate who is running for president who could beat Donald Trump in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So those are the keys to 2020 for the Democratic Party. It's the key also for President Trump in 2020 in terms of getting over that 270 electoral margin.
Yeah, well, but can any of the Democrats beat a good economy on President Trump's watch?
You know, that's one of the things that obviously President Trump has going for him. It is a strong economy. Those GDP numbers, which came out last week, are indicative of that. Over 3%, 3.2%. Very impressive. And this coming Friday, Arthel, we're going to get the latest jobs report. Of course, over the past few months, we've seen unemployment at record lows, below 4%. That is something the president is counting on, banking on, in terms of withstanding the onslaught of literally hundreds of millions of dollars in ads that will be run against him over the course of the next few months.
And, you know, you make a point. Listen, we were speaking about former Vice President Biden now because he made such a splash. He just got into the race, as many people were anticipating. But you're right. We don't know who will end up being the actual Democratic nominee. Meanwhile, though, is there a Democratic dark horse in this race?
Well, I think one of the names that often gets mentioned, and it's early in the process, is someone who's become this dark horse, and that is the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg. It's pretty remarkable what he's accomplished in the relatively few months that he's been in this campaign, the amount of money that he's raised, the amount of attention that he's garnered, and of course, Fox News will be doing a one-on-one town hall meeting with Pete Buttigieg, which follows up on the town hall meeting that Fox had with Bernie Sanders, of course. And that was something that I think, because Bernie Sanders did it, Arthel, I think that you're going to see many of those Democratic challengers to Joe Biden also deciding to do these town halls because, as you know, the DNC has said they will not have debates that will be run by Fox News. They've essentially eschewed any involvement with Fox in the process.
Yeah, but guess what? The Fox audience needs to hear what the Democrats have to say as well, and those candidates are, you know, depending on some of those voters as well. So here we go. We'll keep with the town halls. And meanwhile, party leaders, union members telling candidates that they need to talk about issues that matter to working families. So which platform and in voting bloc do the Democrats need to win back the White House?
Well, it's those white working class voters and even those union households, which will be those demographic groups which will be going after both by Republicans and Democrats in 2020. What we saw in 2016 is that Donald Trump, the candidate, was very successful in winning over those groups. Those are the groups that were often described in the 1980s, Arthel, as those Reagan Democrats. That's the group that Democrats are trying to win back for 2020. And we're already seeing an effort with all those Democratic candidates speaking out in Las Vegas to the SEIU. They want to win them back, and they're going to be doing all they can to win back those white working class voters and union households in 2020.
John, you get to answer by giving me one number. After Labor Day, how many Democratic candidates will still be standing?
Oh, I think they still will be standing. It's only when we get to Iowa, Arthel, that we'll see a lot of them drop off. After all, it was the Iowa caucuses that was the last stand for Joe Biden when he ran against Barack Obama in 2008 after getting something like 3% of the vote. So a lot of these candidates, the money dries up, the support dries up, and then they decide to fold the tent. I think they're going to be in the race at least for a while.
That's what I was thinking. Maybe the money would run out earlier since there's so many people sooner. But anyway, John Decker, we'll have plenty of time to keep talking about it, and we will again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthel.
Back to the race for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. You know, the big story this week has been the addition of former Vice President Joe Biden to the already crowded field. So joining us now to discuss Biden's impact is Democratic strategist and host of the Keep It in Perspective podcast, Christian Hanley, and former Obama campaign regional director and Democratic strategist Robin Biro. So, guys, it's finally happened. Joe Biden has officially entered the race, and I'd like to start by getting both of your reaction to how the former VP actually announced. Kind of give him a grade over how he's done over the last few days, starting with that Twitter announcement and then his appearance on The View yesterday. And Robin, I'll start with you.
Sure thing. We didn't get the announcement that we were hoping for maybe a month ago when we were teased with that Stacey Abrams possible joint announcement. So that didn't happen, but Joe Biden did roll out a very authentic video, tugged at Democratic emotional heartstrings, and it was, following the meeting that he had with the firefighters, and it's continuing his message. His problem is that he's already got 100% name ID, so he's got to fight the death by attrition and keep fresh, Kristen.
Christian, do you think it was a smart idea to start off with this Twitter video, or should he have gone with a big rally?
Well, I think the Twitter video, I don't think it just was about tugging at Democratic voters' heartstrings. I think it really was appealing to America's higher ideals. And he said very directly that this country has not always lived up to its ideals, but we're at a critical juncture right now where we need to decide, do we continue down this path, or do we actually go back and live up to our ideals? And that should really appeal not just to Democratic primary voters, but undecided voters, swing voters. And I think that was quite persuasive. I have to admit, it caught me off guard. I did not think that's the direction he would go in. I thought it would have been a rally. I thought it would have been a lot of reference to his time as vice president, but he took a completely different route. And, the one thing it did is, we're all here on Saturday talking about it right now.
Hey, it surprised us, and we're talking about it, so that's always good. Let's talk about money, because Biden, over the first 24 hours of his campaign, he raised $6.3 million. That's more than any of his contenders over their first 24-hour period officially in the race. But at the same time, you have candidates like Beto O'Rourke saying he sent out a fundraising email to all of his supporters saying the good news, he may have raised more money, Biden may have raised more money than we did, but we have more people contributing in our first 24 hours. So heading into 2020, what's more important, more money or more smaller individual donations? Robin?
Biden, let's not discredit the fact that he got 97,000 unique donors, individual donors, which was astounding. I was really happy with that number particularly. I thought that the fundraising number was a little bit lower than I expected at 6.3 million. I was expecting that to be more like 8 to 10 million. And he's got to hit a solid mark in both categories. In the area of Citizens United, we've got to be able to fundraise. And yes, he came out solid. It just wasn't quite what I thought it would be, but still props to Joe Biden.
And Christian, right now you have Beto O'Rourke and Buttigieg saying that they are going to be actually giving back some money that lobbyists gave them. Is that a smart idea?
Well, I think that that's a move that's designed to appeal to the Democratic primary base, the Democratic primary voters. From a moral standpoint, I do think it is the right thing to do. But right now, you know, I am, for the first time in my life, encouraging everyone I know, all Democratic voters, to be single-issue voters. Right now, the issue needs to be getting the current president out of this White House, and everything else we can sort of sort out amongst each other after the fact. We need to really be focused on that single issue. And so whatever it takes to get there, I think, is what we need to do.
And finally, really quick, right now, a lot of the 2020 contenders are in Las Vegas speaking at a forum hosted by one of the largest unions in the country. And, you know, union leaders have been pretty critical of the 2020 field, saying that they're focusing on these big picture issues like the Green New Deal and Medicare for all, but they're not focusing on the bread and butter issues that actually get voters to the polls. So what would be your advice to the candidates speaking today? What is the pitch that they need to be making, Robin?
Absolutely. We have got to pay attention to those flyover states, the middle America voters. Joe Biden has an edge in that regard, but all of the rest of these candidates really need to pay attention, because that's where we lost in 2016. 41.9% of those voters stayed home, and we have to work to recapture that vote. It's crucial.
Yeah, and that's, of course, a huge part of why President Trump won in 2016 was he was able to get those votes. Now Democrats trying to win them back. Robin and Christian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe Biden finally jumped into the presidential race with a video slamming President Trump. A visit to a Delaware pizza joint. He was surrounded by cameras there. It was carried live on CNN and MSNBC.
But if we give Donald Trump 8 years in the White House, he will forever and fundamentally alter the character of this nation, who we are, and I cannot stand by and watch that happen.
On The View, the former Veep was asked about the 8 women who have accused him of unwanted touching.
Are you sorry for what you did? Are you prepared to apologize to those women?
Look, here's the deal. I have to be, and everybody has to be, much more aware of the private space of men and women.
Molly, considering that Joe Biden is a pretty liberal guy, was Obama's VP, is leading in the Democratic polls, why has the media coverage ranged from negative to pretty hostile?
Well, part of it is just that he is the front runner. He's repeatedly shown up in the polls at the top, and that means you take all the incoming. The other issue, though, is that for the first time in a long time, he's not under that protective umbrella of President Obama. The media adored President Obama, and they would never go after anyone who might reflect poorly on President Obama. But now he doesn't have that protection, and so I think you're seeing that media, who tend to be liberal and tend to be part of more of the activist base, don't find him as woke as he needs to be, or as they would prefer.
And not just woke. And Sarah, reporters like the guy personally. He is a very gregarious fellow. My theory is he's an unexciting candidate to cover as journalists see it, because he's been around forever. He's sort of an old-fashioned campaigner, not a social media guy, and not as much fun as an unorthodox Beto or Mayor Pete.
No, and he's not putting out policy that's going to be radically different than things we've heard. You have people coming in, Andrew Yang talking about universal basic income. We're talking about the Green New Deal. You know, Joe Biden is sort of a reach across the aisle deal maker. He hasn't come out with any of these radically new policies with new hashtags around them that's making the media jump all over looking for coverage.
Hasn't done any hashtags. But Jessica, Slate, the liberal site, says he's a paper tiger. He'll be the Jeb Bush, like Jeb Bush was in 2016. Do some pundits on the liberal side not like Biden because they don't think he's liberal enough? He's not promising free college tuition, Medicare for all. Let's talk about slavery reparations, sort of along the lines of Bernie and Elizabeth and Kamala.
I think that's part of it, and we've yet to see the full platform. I'll be interested, you know, what he does in the healthcare debate about improving Obamacare versus Medicare for all of that. But I think there's also something else that's really important going on here, and that's a lot of mea culpas for the 2016 coverage, and even during the Democratic primary, where reporters really didn't push Bernie Sanders as hard as they pushed Hillary Clinton, of course, and then even when it got to the general, that Hillary got a different level of coverage than Donald Trump did. I think that reporters want to make sure that they're digging as deep as possible on each of these candidates. Bernie is getting it a lot worse than he certainly did in 2016, if you even looked at the She the People summit from last week. So
he barely got any scrutiny in 2016 because he was just seen as entertainment.
Right, and now it's a whole lot more serious.
But you hear, these are the refrains you hear from the pundits. This is such a diverse party. Biden is 76. He's out of step. and he's a white guy.
Yes.
I mean, this has been written in the New York Times and
This
elsewhere.
coverage shows the grips of identity politics, but I think it's important for the media to understand that in the same way that they are far more liberal than the average American, they're even far more liberal than the average Democrat. And the average Democrat likes that Joe Biden is fairly moderate. They like that they think he can beat Donald Trump. And so some of this extremism is just a reflection of newsrooms not representing actual readers and viewers.
Jessica, how did Joe Biden handle the View questions about the women who say he engaged in unwanted touching?
I think that he handled that question extremely well. I think the Anita Hill conversation was a little bit more difficult. I know you're going to touch on that later in the show. But I want to back up what Molly was saying there. It's really important. Ron Klain, who was in the Clinton White House, had a great tweet after Joe Biden's fundraising numbers came in, and he said, I guess there's some Democrats who aren't on Twitter. Yeah. You know, we live in a bubble this way. Joe Biden does appeal across the aisle. The $6.3 million haul is more than any other candidate.
Right.
It's a big deal.
Right. And just briefly, Sarah, he has seemed to me in these last few appearances to be a bit rusty with reporters, a step slow. I mean, he hasn't done this for a while.
Yeah, he's been out of the game. And then you have some candidates like, Kamala Harris, who not only has she announced way earlier than him, but she's been a part of hearings on Capitol Hill, talking to reporters, engaged in some of these newsy, fiery topics. Joe Biden has been sort of privately preparing for this, but he has not been publicly facing cameras. So you're right, he has been a few months out, while some of his rivals on Capitol Hill have been a few months in.
He's going to have to lift his game with the press, I think. Jessica Tarloff, Molly Hemingway, Sarah Fisher, thanks so much for coming by this Sunday.